Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're Masechtas Sanhedrin daf Lamed Daled. We're going to begin on Lamed Daled Amud Aleph by the two dots, about 8 lines from the top. Dinin nefashos, when it comes to capital cases, Hamalabid, etc. So we made a distinction between Dinin Mamadus and Dinin nefashos. That when it comes to Dinin nefashos, once you already say in your mind, and your psak, in your mind, a innocent verdict, so then that's it, you can't change. However, the only time we say this din is only if you're engaged in deliberation. It says Rashi, if to stand by your words, lachsar acharayis, to go after various proofs, however, once it comes to Gemar Din, one is Melamed Schus is able to be Melamed Chayva. Says Rashi, Shechipesh Kvar HaKoil, you dug into everything. V'achshav Nira Shita, it seems like you made a mistake by saying he was Zakai. Chayz Melamed Chayva. So you can be Melamed Chayva. So the only time you can't be Melamed Chayva is only B'shas Masamata. However, at Gemar Din, you could be Chayzer. Meisvei, for the Gemara, Lemacharos, the next day, this is the Mishnah, and Per Koyu B'dikanoi, so we're going to see later on, regarding the requirement of Halanas Adin, about not pushing off the case too long. So the next morning, they get up, Mashkim M'boyin, and they do the following. Hamazaka, you're the one who finds him to be acquitted, says, Ani Hamazaka, I find him innocent. Hamazaka ni bim koimi, and I am keeping to my position. So the way I thought, I'm going to stick to it. Hamachayev Ani Hamachayev, I'm the one who says that he is guilty. Hamachayev ni bim koimi, and I'm keeping to my position of his guilt. Hamalamed chayva, hamalamed schus. Hamalamed schus, and yochel lachsev hamalamed chayva. However, when it comes to, if you originally were malamed schus, you can't change it to guilt. I b'hol macharis Gemar Dinhu. I thought we just said by Gemar Din you're able to retract, and since it took place already the next day, and the whole purpose is just that you can sleep on it, so there was already a Gemar Din. Basically, this is Gemar Din. And yet it says here that once you're Malamed Schus, you cannot be Lachsul Limud Chayva. So for the Gemara, how do we understand this? So answer is, well, time according to your reasoning, well, Macharas, the next day, Masamatan Mileka. Well, you're telling me the next day there's no more deliberation? Kikatana B'shas Masamatan. And we're talking that's the situation where it was during the time of deliberation. Tashma. So, done in Elu Keneged Elu. So let's say you have a Sanhedrin, and there's 36 versus 35. So done in Elu Keneged Elu. So we will judge this Keneged the others. Says Rashi, Hecha, the Nechlu Bedin, Shloishim V'Shisha Mechayavin. 36 say he's guilty. Shloishim Chamishim Mazakin. And 35 say he's innocent. Now, we already learned at the beginning of this Masechta, the Ein Matan L'Chayva, we also saw this recently, Al Pi Echad, that when it comes to finding someone guilty, a 35-36 split will not work. Even though there's a row of 36 saying that he's guilty, that's not enough. You need to have 2. So, done in Elu Keneged Elu, so they're going to judge this one Keneged this one, Ad Shira Echad Min HaMachayubin Divrei Hamazakin, until one of the people who felt initially he was guilty basically turns. Now, now, if it's true that you're able to change your psak from innocent to guilty, so why do you say it that way? Why does it only tell you the case that we're going to try to get the person who is guilty, who finds them guilty, to turn his psak? How about the guy who finds him to be acquitted, changes psachtim to Mechayev? So it must be Again, the question is, when did this take place? It says Rashi, "Avalasabo echamin hamazakin lo katani." Now, v'miisa the Gemara din. If we're talking about the end, that yochel asa limud chayva, that you could actually be a limud chayva because it's Gemara din. So nisinami imcha. Why does it say it the other way around? That maybe one of the guys who is mazaka will be machayev. V'nema o echad min hamazakin es divrei hamachayev and the ika hatoyil ra pishnayim. Will end up becoming 37 verses 34. Tana, so where it says Tana aschus kamahader achayva loy kamahader. We are not going to be mahader in this situation to try to get the guy guilty, to get one of the guys to join, so there'll be more people who'll find him guilty, but the other way around we will. Tashma, Yomi Rabbi Yosi bar Chanina, echad min ha-talmidim shezicha. Let's say one of the students who is zicha to become a member of his zoicha to become a member of the court, umes, and then dies. So what do we do in that case? So royan oiso kiu chai. We actually will envision as though regarding counting, as though he's actually alive. And he's standing in his place to make the guy not guilty. But if he was alive, maybe he would have retracted at Gemar Din and found the guy chayiv. No hashta miya lo haderbe, but he hasn't retracted. Obviously, he's dead. But the point is that we're just going to say, yeah, you could retract, but in this situation, we're going to go after where his original decision in his own was to be mazaka. I've hashoch mitam was sent from there. And that's how could you answer this pshat? Says Rashi, how can you answer Lahad Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina karav, that he holds like Rav? V'shoch mitam l'dibur Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina moitza mechlal Rabbeinu, that he goes against this psak. Had Rabbi Yosef will svirway to Rav Diyam Rabbi Shas Gemara Din Chaysel Chayva. He doesn't hold of this. So rather change the language of ein moitza itmar, that he's not excluded. Ein moitza. Don't say L'div Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina moitza machlal Rabbeinu, that he goes away from him. No, ein moitza idmar, which means, says Rashi, ein moitzian machlal divi Rav. He doesn't go against his psak. The time of the Rav Yossi mishum dahashna miya lo yihadabe. He taka does agree to the shita. Tashma shnei sofer hadayanim. So you have these two scribes. They're oimdin lifneihem. They're sitting in front of the court. Echad min yamin, v'echad min small. One's on the right, one's on the left. The kaisvin divrei hamazachim, divrei hamachayavin, and they write all the different words of the person who says they should be guilty, one who says not guilty. Says Rashi, ploini chayiv umin hatam hazeh, ploini zicha umin hatam hazeh. So he explained they have to write down everything. He said he thinks he's chayiv because of this reason. He thinks he's not chayiv because of this reason. So they're sitting there. They're kaistin divrei hamazachim divrei hamachayavin. Now bishlam divrei hamachayavin. I understand why it's necessary for them to write on the first day all the reasons why they should maybe find the guy guilty. Because the next day, chazu time achrina, maybe we'll come up with a different reason. And therefore, he's going to need to sleep on the second reasoning. So therefore, you need to have a reason. So therefore, the second time, when he comes up with something else, you need halanas din on the second reason. So therefore, it makes sense that they have to be recorded as to the reasoning, so that we understand whether we require another night of halanas din. El Dever Hamazakin, my taima, when it comes to the one who says the guy's innocent, what's the reason why it needs to be written down? Lamishum, Di Chazu Taima Chrina L'chayva, Lo Mashkachinan Bahu. Maybe it's even though if he comes up with a reason to find him guilty, we're not going to listen. And therefore, this could be a question, because we just said that Gemar Din, according to Rav, that when it comes to Gemar Din, he could be low. So that's not the reason why it's written down. So why is it written down? If he originally was mazaka, that we don't want two judges to come up with the same reason from two different psukim. Because when there is a pasuk, it's derived. You can only derive one thing from a pasuk. You can't have two things. You can't have from two psukim the same idea, because there would be no chiddush in that. So therefore, we have to write it down so we understand exactly how he's getting his sources, and therefore, once we know his sources, then we'll be able to compare it to the next statement, and therefore to make sure that it's proper. Let's say two people said one reason, and they derive it from two psukim mahu. Does that work? We will only count them like one judge, like one. Says Rashi, because one of this is obviously the psukim is not coming to tell us that. So the fact that they're quoting two different psukim, it can't be one of the psukim cannot be correct. The reason cannot be that you can't learn out the same reason from two totally separate psukim. You can only learn out from one pasuk. The other one obviously is not what you're learning out from, because you don't need two psukim to teach us the same thing. So therefore, they only count as one judge. Says Rashi, the kaimulan lo nichtavu shnei mikrais lo tamechad. We don't have to write down two psukim with one reason. Hilka chaiminayu mitatoi. One of them made a mistake. So immediately said the Gemara, how do we know this? I'm Rabbi, the pasuk says achas dibur elokim. It says the word achas. Shtayim lo shemaiti. Two I didn't hear. Ki oz elokim, because the might of Hashem. So mikra echad yaitza l'kama tamim, which means like this: that one pasuk we can have a whole lot of drushes from one pasuk. But one drasha can't come out from numerous sources. Rabbi Tana, going down from a different pasuk, he says ukapatish yifaitzitzel, just like a hammer of a blacksmith which smashes the stone. Ma patish mischalek lekamen titzaitzis, that when it smashes it, many sparks come out. Af mikra echan yotzim kamatamim. So to one pasuk, much can come out from one pasuk. So heichidami tam echan mishnei mikrais. What would be a practical example so we understand what we're talking about? Whereas one reason from two different psukim, and obviously one of the psukim is not correct, to derive this source from it. So Amarav Zvid Kiditnan, like we learned regarding karbonis, so when it comes to mizbeach mekadesh aroyloi, so the mizbeach will make kodesh that which it is fit for it. What is that referring to? Says Rashi, psulin shim yalu yardu, that there's certain things that are put onto the mizbeach that even though they may be pasul, but nonetheless it can be mekadesh because it's somewhat fit for it. We'll see that in the second Rashi, that if you put it on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. Eser royal, says Rashi, Mavachehi davar shenira kvar mizbeach, something which is at some point connected to the mizbeach or karbanos. Mafarish limute kamatzim shlo kadshu b'kli. It's excluding when it does the kamitza with the flour offering, the mincha, but you weren't sanctifying this flour in a kli, and therefore that in itself we don't say shi'im olu yardu. Abul pigul, when it comes to an improper machshava during certain parts of the avodah, where v'nishbach damoi, pouring in the blood, v'nishchat b'machsheves psul im olu yardu. So all these different things. So just like focusing on pigul, it's pigul on a proper carbon. But since you did pigul, that invalidates it. But we say imolu lo yardu. Once it went up, we don't put it down. So anyway, so the Gemara over there explains it in greater length. But anyway, let's go back to the Gemara. So this is going to hopefully bring a source to us. So in this, Rabbi Yeshua Aimer, kol haray leishim, anything that is fit to be burnt on the mizbeach would fall under this category. Im oil el yared, that if you put it on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. Shnemar ha'oil al moita Ma oila shehi royal ishim, just like we know a carbon oil is fit to be burned completely. Im also terid, also when it comes to a carbon oil, the din is if it goes up, we don't take it down. Av kol shehu royal ishim im oil yerid. Rabbi Gamliel oimer kol haroyal mizbeach. Anything was fit for the mizbeach im oil yerid. Shnemar, as the pasuk says, from he has a different source. He doesn't learn it out from ha'oila al moikta. Rather, Shnemar, as the pasuk says, he ha'oila al moikta al mizbeach. Ma oila shehi royal gam mizbeach im also lo tered. Av kol shehu royal mizbeach im oil lo tered. Now the problem is you have the same reason learned out from two different psukim. Retuvaihu my kamarabu psulin. Both of them. What are they including? Mar Maisila Mimmoikta, Mar Maisila Mimizbeach. They're learning out the same thing that even though something which is possible, like Pigel, for example, nonetheless, it's Im Olu Yardu. But they learn out from two different psukim. V'hahasam Mifag Pligi, they argue, the Katani Seifa, Ein Ben Divrei Rabbi Gamliel, or Divrei Rabbi Yeshua, the distinction between Rabbi Gamliel, who cited the pasuk of Hi Ha'oila, and the statement of Rabbi Yeshua, who used the pasuk of Ha'oila al Moikta, they really are saying the same thing, but Ella Hadam v'Hanasachim. They argue actually when it comes to Dam in libations. As Rashi, Shenifsalu or Yardu, the Niru Mizbech, because Dam is fit to be put on the Mizbech, and so are Nesachim, the Yain Nesach, the Nisach HaYayin, the wine libations. Rabbi Gamliel Omer Lo Yardu, Rabbi Yeshua Omer Yardu. According to Yeshua, he says Yardu. Why does Rabbi Yeshua say Yardu? So let's look at his reasoning. Kol haroy leishim has to be something which is fit to be burnt on the Mizbech. So that excludes Nesachim and Dam, which are not burnt on the Mizbech, they're put on the Mizbech. That's what Rashi says over here, She'enu leishim. They're not on the fire. Anyway, the point is, that doesn't seem like a very good proof, because they actually don't say the same thing. They argue. Elam Rapapa Kedisanya. Rabbi Yosef Glil Omer Metayshin, because the pasuk says as we continue to Lamed Daled Beis, since the pasuk says Kol Hanoigeya b'Mizbech Yikdosh, anything, even something which is possible that touches the Mizbech becomes sanctified. Rashi explains Vo Yared, that you don't take it off. So Shameani ben Roy ben Shein Roy. You would think even something which really has no connection to the Mizbech. Says Rashi, for example, Sor, sourdough, Dvash, V'ayil, Tzvi, V'chulin, right? So if you have a chulin, which is not a carbon, so it's not roy to be on the Mizbech, so maybe nonetheless if it does go on the Mizbech in that situation, still a yardu, Talmud Lemer, Kvasim, Ma Kvasim, Roy, and Avkol, Roy. That's got to be only something fit to be put on the Mizbech. Kiba Omer, Rabbi Kiva is a different pasuk. He says, "Oila ma oil roy av kol roy." For tavayu ma kamamatu. When they come to exclude psuli, mar ma'isela mikvasim, mar ma'isela oila. So therefore, we see this is a situation where you have two people that are learning out the same reason from two different psukim, and that one of them is obviously incorrect. Avi yomer Rav Adabarava oilas ha'oif. When it comes to the elevation offering of a bird, psula, ikabenayu. If it's possible, there actually is a chil between them. Why? Because mandamaisila mikvasim, one who learned out from kvasim, which is a behema, so it's davga behema. Kvasim in avoyla soif lo. Mandamaisila ma'oila feel oila soif nami. So it says ola, so an oila soif. So apparently, again, we don't see this nafgamina. We do see a nafkamina, and therefore this doesn't seem like to be a good raya. Finally, let's the maskana. I think this is the maskana. Dam yichashiv ishahu dam shafach. Rabos es hazayrik. This is referring to shchutei chutz, someone who takes the carbon, which was supposed to be brought in the Mizbeach, instead was brought outside, out of the Beis HaMikdash. And even Zyrik, someone who sprinkles the dam outside of the Beis HaMikdash, that is what this is referring to. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, B'kiva Omer, Ozavach, or Rabbi says a Zyrik. It's coming to include a Zyrik. So again, you have two psukim that are including the issue of not the Shchutei Chutz, but also Zrika. So that's what it's referring to. For Tevayu, Maika Marabu, what are they including? Zrika. Mar Maisel Medam Yechashim, Mar Maisel Man's Me'oy Zavach. V'yam Rabavo, Shachtu V'zark, if you shecht and you throw the blood, Ikumenayu. There actually is a nafkamina if you did both. So again, we see there is a distinction there too, whether you're chayav once or twice, 1 or 2 times. Says Rashi, Rabbi Akiva diolav zayrik mikares dechsev gabi ma'al habi lahu shaykh v'zayrik shnei krisos v'chayav shtayim v'yavgav de'ika shtei krisos hoyel v'ein behen el azhar achas in chilak chatas b'neiim. So the question is, again, we do see whether you're chayav twice or only once. So apparently it's not a good proof, not a good example. Even according to Rabbi Kiva, who says eno chayav el achas, it's true, but nami eno chayav el achas. You're only chayav 1 for the carbon chatas. You only chayav 1 carbon chatas. The Amar Kra, sham taloi loscha v'sham tase. Arvinhu rachman l'kuhu asiyos. They're put all together. Okay, so let's look at a question. Finally, let's get to question 13. Matai malamid schus bedin nefashos chayz malamid chayva umatai enu chayz malamid. So b'shas masa my matan you're not allowed to. However, b'shas gemar din you may. Okay. Fight. Simin mishpad ma'anamat. So dinimominus din b'yoyim. So when it comes to theimominus, we judge during the day. So the pasuk you can judge any time. So then tchilos din should also be done. So let's look at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says regarding the time, dini mominus done in b'yoyim, you can judge during the day. V'garmin b'layla, you complete it at night. Din nefashos done in b'yoyim, v'garmin b'yoyim. So din nefashos has to be completely day. However, there's a chiluk by din mominus. Even though it's true, by din mominus that you can judge, but you have to also be done b'yoyim, but you can complete it at night. So that's the leniency that we allow. You need to be Gemar Din at night for Din Imamnas. That's why the pasuk is you can do it any time, which therefore means that you can complete the psak even at night. So why do we say that Tchilas Din has to be done during the day? Maybe that could also be done at night. So could a Rabbi, yes, a stira. Ksiv, the pasuk says the shafta asam b'chaleis can be done any time. Ksiv v'haya b'yoyim hanchilas banav. So is it day or is it any time? So haketzad yoyim otchilas adin. When it comes to v'haya b'yoyim, it means the beginning of the din. However, when it says v'shavta esa'am, it's l'gemar din. Lila is gemar din. So mastisel k'Rab Meir. So our Mishnah is not like the Shittim Rameir. It's saying yohay Rab Meir Ra'im Matam. What does it mean? The pasuk says that al pihem yekol rivachol noiga, that there will be through your mouth all quarrels and all naga. What does disputes have to do with naga, with saras, of getting leprosy, we'll call it? We know that when the Kohen inspects the person to see if in fact this person has saras, and that person will become tameh, or is the person tahar, has to be done during the day for practical reasons. It does say the pasuk there's a kasav, because logically he has to see it very well during the day. So therefore we learn just like that. So too when it comes to disputes, it also has to be during the day. Just like saras, shloi besumin, you can't be a blind kohen, right? A blind kohen can't paskin whether the person's tummy or tar, he can't see. He has to be able to see with his eyes. So too, when it comes to a judge, you can't be blind, right? Justice is blind, but a judge is not allowed to be blind. Just like when it comes to rivim, we don't allow a karav, as we saw at great length already in this Masechta. After goyim, shlo b'karayvim. So too, a kohen cannot be a relative when they renders the decision if you're tamei or tahor regarding saras. If that's the case, that we're comparing them all together, then ma'rivim b'shloisha, then goyim b'shloisha. L'chayra, you should have 3 kohanim. V'dinhu, b'moyne b'shloisha, gufalo kol shekain. If when it comes to just money, you need 3 judges, so your own verdict regarding a body, certainly it should require 3. The pasuk says clearly, the pasuk says explicitly that even one is allowed. So that is a distinction. Hahut Sami, there was this blind person. There was this blind individual that the Havi Mishvusid Rav Yochanan, he was the neighbors of Rav Yochanan, Davi Doin Dine, he used to be judging. Rav Yochanan never said anything, even though he was a judge. So how could this be? Remember Rav Yochanan halachas tam mishnah, tanan kol hakashuli doin kashul hayed. Anyone who can judge can be a witness. There's some people who are kosher to judge, to give testimony. Even if you're just blind in one eye, you're not allowed to judge. So how is he allowed, this guy who was blind, to be a judge? How could he have not said anything? So Rabbi Yochanan stamach rita ashkach. You're right. Rabbi Yochanan holds like a stam mishnah. But what if there's another stam mishnah? Then he could hold like that. Dini mominus done b'yoyim v'gam b'layla. Now it comes to dini mominus, it starts during the day, but we can complete it at night. Now, what's so special at night? Night's pitch black. And therefore Rashi says Duma da Soima. When it's night, you're like a blind person. You can't see as well at night as during the day. So therefore, he learns out from this Stam Mishnah that Taka, a blind person, could be a judge. So 1 second, there's 2 Stam Mishnahs. We always hold, Rav Yochanan holds like a Stam Mishnah. So my Ulumi, the high Stama, Mahai Stama. Why would we assume that he holds like this Stam Mishnah over the other one? Why is this Stam Mishnah stronger than the other? So Iboy saying about Stama Derabim Odif. Maybe you could say the Stam Derabim is greater. That because it's in our Mishnah is like the Iker. What does he do with this pasuk? Which again we said that you can judge any time, which means by Gemar Din. So he says that even on a cloudy day, you're allowed to paskin on a cloudy day, even if you can't see so good. Dinan ein roines on the goyim shacharis. You cannot see negoyim in the morning. Ubin arboyim or in the afternoon. V'lo b'toich habayis, that in the house. V'lo b'yoyim hamunan, and not on a cloudy day. Mipnei shekeya niras aza. Because when it comes to saras, what may appear as one thing could appear like something else. V'lo b'tzaharayim, but not during the strong light either. And nei she'az and niras kea. Because something which is strong could appear light, so weaker. So it has to be the proper lighting. Rameir hay b'yoyim hanchilas bana maya. What does he do this pasuk? What does this mean about judging, doing inheritance during the day? So, that when it comes to a nachala, it has to be at the daytime and not at night. What does that mean? If you die during the day, then your children you'll inherit. But if the guy dies at night, his kids will not inherit. What does that mean? No. Of course, if he dies during the day or during the night, his children are still going to be able to inherit. But what is this distinction? Dilma din nachalois ka'amrit. The din of nachal. What does that mean? The sanya. The pasuk says, "V'hayla ne'Yisrael luchukas mishpat." So ayro kol parshakul yois din. So the whole pasuk is talking about judgment. If you have three people that come to me mavakar chayla, ratzu kaisin writes an ice and din, because since three people came, so they could sit down as judges. Rashi says kaisvin b'loshen edus by yarshim yavul obesin yasu kavi hatzava. So they can write it down, and therefore they have to follow whatever was decided. So if they want, they could be like Adam, or they could be like a Dayan. Shnayim kaisvin v'einoisin din. However, two could write as testimony, but they can't be judges. There's only two. However, even if there was a bunch of people, so let's say there's three, it doesn't make any difference. If it comes at night, they could do testimony v'einoisin din. There's no din that's allowed at night. Shnamar mishum dehavi le'edim. Because the fact that they wrote it down, they're already witnesses. They ain't as a dayan, and an aid cannot be a dayan. He said, yes, that's precisely what we were discussing. Okay. Let's keep going. Let's see question 14 first. So what does it mean all day? So one shot is that the Gemara din could even be at night. Or it's coming to include a Yom HaMu'unan. It's coming to include a cloudy day. So maybe not at night, but we will allow a cloudy day. TA 13. Mal Waimdim Apostli V'Shavtu Eis B'Chol Eis. Exactly the same question. TA 13. And let's see what TB 14 Shavna B'Chol Eis Ma'Bab Pasig Zel Lamdu. It says two answers, which is exactly the same thing. For this one, I'll see what I wrote. TB 14. This is what I wrote. Motil Haskell Yon Ligmar B'Laila, Rabbis Yom Hama'unan V'lo Kedine Negoyim. Okay, very good. Let's finish this up. It's 2 dots. We'll get to the next 2 dots on the next Amud. Din Nefashah is done in B'Yoyim. When it comes to Din Nefashah, however, it has to be the day, even the Gemara Din. So Minahanimil, so Maram Shimi Barchi Omer Kra, the pasuk says, V'huka Oisim Hashem Neged Hashemesh, that they hung them Neged Hashemesh, which means during the day, which is referring to a Gemara Din, and the Gemara Din had to be during the day. How do you know that word is referring to hanging? Because the pasuk says in Shmuel Beis, that they were hung Bachir Hashem, the chosen one of Hashem, as we continue to Lamed Hamid Aleph, and furthermore it says in Shmuel Beis, also in Chaf Aleph, V'tikach Ritzba Bas Aya, that Ritzba Bas Aya took as hasak, the sackcloth, V'titehu La El Atzor, and put it on the rock, but Chilas Katzir, in the beginning of the reaping season. V'ksiv, and furthermore, Pasuk says in Bamidbar, V'yomer Hashem El Moshe, Kachas Kol Rashi Am, take all the leaders, Yim Ha'am Chatu, if they sin, so Rashi Am Ma Chatu. So understand, what did they do wrong? So Rabbi Yehuda, Marav, Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu Moshe, Chilkehem Bati Dinim. You should divide up Bati Dinim with them. So my time, why separate courts? Because you can't have two capital cases on the same day. That's only after two separate misos. If it's the same death, you could do it on the same day. In order to calm down the anger that Hashem has on Klal Yisrael. Also Rashi. So v'tikach ritzba bas aya alma megulin hoyu lafisha tluyin al eitzim. They were hanging on a tree. V'imishum so nivlasoi. But I thought you're not supposed to have a body hanging for an extended period of time. So the Masechtas Yevamos told us that mutter ti'aker ois achas b'Torah. Even if you're going to uproot a letter from the Torah, in other words, you're going to violate something in the Torah, v'iskadesh shem shemayim for hesya. Shahayu hakol royin oisan v'shoal and mativin shel elu. Why these great leaders hung, who are bnei malachim, upashtu yadim begerim gerurim. So therefore, it shows that they people are like, wow, they accept responsibility. Just again had to do with, if I remember the Masechta over there well, in Yevamos is talking about where the people wanted revenge for the way that their ancestors were mistreated, and therefore because of that they said we're not going to receive we're not going to give forgiveness until you hang some of these great leaders. And we kept the bodies hanging there for an extended period of time, even though that's not something which you normally do. Also, we usually, even though they didn't sin, we usually say lo yumsu avos albanim. So this was also an exception. The Gemara there says. V'hachi kamer kach kol rashi am v'hoylech itam l'bati dinim harbe. Bring them to a lot of courts. V'yidunes oiver aveira, and they should judge the people who sin. You should hang those people up. This is referring to the people who worship the Avodah Zarah Baal Peor. Now we know that someone who worships idols, the punishment is skila. And if you, person dies, we hang the body, as we're going to see in Parak Arba Misais. So he says Rashi, Shein Beis Echad Don Shnayim B'Yom Echad El Mishnei Misos Hu De'enu Donin. You can't have them do two different death penalties on the same day. They're not comparable. Maybe didn't look into it so much. However, here, because it was all the same punishment of skila for the avera vodas kachavim to Baal Peor, achas ve'avera achas donin. So the question is, like, what does that mean? So he said, v'yishan charon af. K'shakadosh Baruch Hu roi, when Hashem sees sheklam asukim b'davar, that they're all involved in this matter, umekanin l'chvoidai, and they are stepping up because of the honor of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so therefore it causes Hashem's anger to dissipate. Ad Kan.